All right, so the second phase of fighting would be the start of the Seven Years' War. So again, this war takes place from 1754 to 1763. That's 9 years. In Europe, they call this war the Seven Years' War because this is where like fighting breaks out outside of North America. Britain becomes much more heavily involved. There's fights in other parts of the empire. There's fights, you know, in other parts of the world between Britain and France. Spain gets involved, and this is really like a major like empire clash during the colonial period. And so the second phase, starting in 1756, is going to be the 7 Years' War phase, as it's known in Europe. Now, William Pitt becomes the Secretary of State in 1757, and he is tasked with managing this war. And so he is going to organize the colonial militias and military efforts under the British military. So you're going to start seeing a lot more British soldiers, regular soldiers sent. You'll see British military leaders sent, and they're going to try to manage the war. Now, again, the colonies at this point, they view their militias and their individual colonial governments as like their representative bodies. So they start to resent Parliament coming over and Parliament sending the British military. And so you got regular troops taking control of all these things with stuff that didn't come from the Virginia Assembly or the Massachusetts Assembly or that sort of thing, especially when the colonists are expected to feed and house the troops. So quartering of troops is put in place, and again, not very popular among the colonies. But it is going to change the tide of fighting. So during the second phase of fighting, um, you get this friction between the colonists and the British, and you get sort of an extension of a pattern that's already been in place that's going to really rapidly expand during the American Revolution, and that is the British get involved in the colonies in some way. In this case, it's militarily, and the colonists resent the presence of the British and British Parliament making decisions. You start to see the colonies like talk about how unfair or mistreated they are, and this is going to become like a lot of the pattern and dialogue that comes up when the war is over. In terms of fighting, however, this is going to shift things in favor of the British. Now, for the British, they view the colonies as the word that's on the slide is inept, but yeah, they kind of see the colonies as unqualified, underperforming, not pulling their weight. They have to come here and bail them out, and it's for the British. This is where their resentment's going to come from, and again, that's going to shape what happens when the war comes to an end. But the war comes to an end pretty quickly after that. Really, from 1758 to 1761, when the fighting really turns in favor of the British, it comes to an end. Really, by 1761, a lot of the main fighting is done, and then the treaty that ends the war is signed in 1763. But in this third phase of fighting, you get another example of the pattern that's going to be used during the American Revolution, and that is the colonists are upset and they're critical of British policies. They're talking about how unfair British policies are, and then Britain stops them, right? So, for example, the colonies are upset about fourth quartering of troops or colonial militias having to submit directly to British military authority. So, when the tide of fighting starts sort of coming under control, Britain says, okay, you can go back to the way things were, right? So, for the colonies, they can see, they're not quite unified at this point, but they can see the power of voicing dissatisfaction or being discontent and seeing Britain scale back their policies that they disagreed with. The problem that comes up after the war is Britain can't do that anymore. And we'll talk about that why when we get there. But for our purposes, this war comes to an end in 1763. The treaty that ends the war, basically, and there's a list here of what happens. England basically takes control of North America. There's some other stuff outside of the Americas that's involved, but we're going to focus on the Americas. So the Mississippi River area to the east coast goes to England. Spain had entered into a secret treaty with France and gets the west half of French Louisiana. So France, after 1763, is out of North America for now. They're going to come back. There's still a presence in Canada as well, but we'll deal with the French are going to come back up. But for now, they're out. Spain increases their holdings, but Britain also increases their holdings. So now Britain goes from the East Coast all the way to the Mississippi River. Now, there were British colonists that were already moving in that direction, but now England officially has this territory. Okay. Now, if you're looking at this map here, this is what we're talking about. So basically, from here down the Mississippi to the east, that goes to England. Now, the colonists get they get an inflated sense of worth. They also feel like they now have access to all this land, and we're going to see there are some differences in opinion on how this land should be monitored. So again, we'll talk about that in our next set of content. For Native Americans, they largely chose to either stay out of the fight or fight with the French. Once the French lost, they are out of luck. Again, it makes sense. Playing both sides. For the Iroquois, for example, they traded with both sides. So they didn't necessarily want to antagonize the British, but they didn't want to antagonize the French, so they stayed out. Now that France has lost, however, England views that as just as bad as fighting against them. So they're out. In terms of a good relationship with Britain, groups that fought with the French, Britain views them as an enemy they're going to hold this against them. But many of these groups had already been forced west by the British in the first place. So this is nothing new. Many groups here in the Ohio Valley kind of viewed this as the last chance to maybe push the British back or keep them from expanding, because they experienced that and it was not a good experience for Native Americans. So if we talk about like British expansion here, that's true. They are doubling the size of the land, but they're also displacing that many more Native Americans, many of which they had already kind of displaced in the first place. Now, this war is going to open up the issues between Britain and the colonies. And especially after the war is over, a lot of the issues that come up are kind of rooted here in this conflict. So it's important to sort of pick up on, kind of the theme and the origin and what happened and some of the stuff that took place throughout the war. But going forward, it's interesting to come back to this moment, which 1763, when the war was over, it's kind of a high point for Britain and the British Empire here in North America. The amount of land that they claimed, they pushed the French out, and they've opened up, basically doubled their land holding. But as we're going to see, that is going to be a short-lived high point that is going to quickly evolve into a much worse situation between Britain and the colonies.